Hello, everyone, and welcome. So, I am the Mystic Therapist, or better known as Courtney. The point of this podcast is really to address something that I see quite frequently within my field of practice as being a supervisor for a pretty large integrated healthcare agency, and that's burnout and vicarious trauma. And it's something that we recognize in the mental health field as being a serious problem. We see it in ourselves, we see it in our coworkers, but we don't often address it. And no matter how often we continue to talk about it, it still kind of keeps getting brushed under the rug. It's kind of one of those things of, yeah, I know about it, but my importance is to focus on my clients, not on myself. The reality is we really can't do that. Just like we talk to our clients that, they need to take care of themselves first. They need to really focus on their self-care. We have to be able to do the same thing as clinicians in this field. So, we're, I really want to spend some time kind of exploring different ways that you can take care of yourself during your workday. Oftentimes, when I talk to staff within their supervision, especially when I recognize that they're struggling, I'll ask, well, what do you do for self care? What do you do to manage the stressors of this position? And I get a variety of answers of, well, you know what, on the weekend, I'll go and I'll spend time with family and friends. I'll go to the movies. I'll do something fun. Or I get, well, after work, I go to the gym a few days of the week. Or I hear things, I get a massage every once in a while. I go get manis or petties, or they'll talk about different things that they do after work. And usually it's kind of like things off in the distance, not things that they're doing every single day. And that's key to being able to survive this field and being able to manage to stay in the field because the burnout rate and the attrition rate in this field is ridiculously high. And it's important that we really do focus on burnout and vicarious trauma if we want to be able to maintain valuable and very needed employees in this field. Before we jump into our topic today and focusing more on the definitions as well as the symptoms of burnout and vicarious trauma, I did want to share a little bit with you all about my experience and background. So I started in the field over 20 years ago. I won't say how far over 20 years ago, but as a family support specialist. I had just finished my bachelor's in psychology and jumped right into work, like literally the day after I graduated, as within this position, which was a prevention-based program working with parents of children from the ages of 0 to 5. And our goal was to prevent child abuse and neglect. It was a pretty intensive program and pretty emotional at times too with some of the families that we worked with. And I stayed with that program for just under 2 years as I was working on my master's degree in counseling. I left the program to complete my internship, and after I finished my internship and finished with my master's degree, I went into the school system and I was a school counselor for about 8 years. During that time, I really kind of felt like my skills as a counselor and a therapist were able to really grow. I had some amazing opportunities to work with Northern Arizona University on different projects on expanding curriculum and prevention-based programs and a social emotional learning, all kinds of great things that we were able to bring into our schools based off of grants, working in partnership with NAU, like I said. I was also heavily involved with our student assistance teams, working with kiddos that were being referred for special education and their individualized education plans. I was also the 504 committee chair. Um, I PBIS, which is still pretty heavy within the school systems, positive behavior intervention and supports. I was a coach and facilitator for those programming too within not only my school directly, but also helping with the district as a whole. I became certified as a trainer for the Ulvaeus Bullying Prevention Program, which we also implemented in our district. And eventually, with the help of my coworker, we trained every school in our entire county on the premise behind the Ulvaeus program. And heavily involved with that piece mainly because of the PBIS grant that we were working under. My last year working within the school district, I was actually the school counselor coordinator. So it was more of a supervisory role and working in kind of a mentorship for the other counselors in the district and helping them with the implementation of their programs. And also heavily involved with our behavioral intervention programs within the district too. However, that was during a time period where there were a lot of cuts to education and healthcare, most specifically towards mental health. And so position disappeared. And along with many other positions in the school counseling within our district and others. So I went back into mental health and I took a position as a combined case manager and therapist. And let's just say I'm really glad things have changed the way they have over these last, well, decade or so. Because when I was in that position, I had over 150 clients at one point in time. I never got under maybe about 120 clients, and it was literally impossible to provide for the needs of our clients with that kind of caseload, especially trying to be the case manager and the therapist. Along with that, too, we had specific programs that kind of became my responsibility because I was the one with the most experience and the masters and the license. And so it's just kind of like, oh, you can teach this program that I had no training, no experience on, and had to figure it out on my own. I spent that first year back in mental health actually with no supervisor. There was one assigned, but you never saw him. so, so it was really an interesting year. But it was also that year that really pushed me to recognize this idea of burnout and vicarious trauma because it was happening to me. I actually have a couple pretty serious medical conditions, one of which is never going to really improve. I manage to function, and I've learned how to cope with my symptoms, and I've learned how to get along with it. But I'll be honest, I live in pain, and that pain often clouds my thinking, and it also really kind of affects my immune system as well. So I have to be careful about what I do. And that year, working with that intensity of care and kind of being thrown into situations that I probably shouldn't have been thrown into without a supervisor took a huge toll on me physically and mentally. And I crashed and I burned and I was out of work and I couldn't return to work for over a year. My health took that big of a hit. And I had to do a lot of soul searching during that year and really kind of spending some time on kind of relearning my body and learning what worked for me and what was the best ways that I could take care of myself and really heavily focusing in on my self care and recognizing that that needed to be a priority for me. And that should have been a priority all along. So when I got the clean bill of health and was able to return to work, I did really luck out. I went back to work with a company that was just kind of starting off in our community. It had been in the state for a while, but really working on more of the outpatient counseling side was kind of new towards the agency. And like I said, they had just actually opened within our community. Um, and it was amazing. It was a great team to work with. They were really heavy on training and support for staff. They they put us first, and even though still bottom line was important, they knew that they couldn't have that bottom line if they didn't take care of their staff. And so working there and having a chance to grow professionally there really, I think, helped me become the supervisor that I am today. It was actually there that I first took that step into becoming a clinical supervisor. So I was with that agency for just under 10 years. And unfortunately, COVID kind of hit us pretty hard in certain areas. And it was kind of the decision later on down the line to go ahead and close up shop, which was a huge blow to all of us who worked there. Because not only was it just that we all agreed it was the best agency that any of us would work for, we were a family. So it was a huge hit, huge loss. But we were kind of lucky because the agency that I'm working for now stepped in and said, we're willing to take on your staff and your clients as best we can. And so that's ended up what ended up happening. And the majority of my team came with me to this new agency. Some are still there, some have chosen to move on to other agencies that best fit them. Um, but it was good to be able to know that we weren't just kind of losing out altogether, especially at a scary time like COVID where things were shut down and how are you going to get a job in this field. But I think COVID brought another real important insight to the field of mental health. I think there's always been the stigma, and the stigma still exists to this day. But people finally started waking up in COVID and going, "Oh my goodness, what are we doing without these mental health providers?" Well, not just mental health providers, but just healthcare providers in general. But understanding just that stress and the toll that COVID took, the mental health care system really blew up after that. And really, I think people started taking notice and say, hey, maybe we should put a little bit more emphasis and effort within our mental health care and really look at the importance of that and trying to reduce even further the stigma that mental health gets. Unfortunately, it also brought more into impact the fact that, again, us as mental health care workers don't spend a lot of time taking care of ourselves. We're caretakers at heart. We are the ones that want to fix everybody else to the detriment of ourselves. We are really good at not practicing what we preach. And so, over these last 4 years, since I have been in this coordinator position where I get to not only be a clinical supervisor, but I also spend a lot of time doing training for our staff. And I'm involved also within program development. So currently, I supervise all of our children's team. We also have a school based program, and I supervise all of the counselors within that program and about half of our therapists. I do provide also just kind of support for any staff who needs it. So, kind of, that time when they're struggling, they'll find their way into my office and sit and talk, and I'll be their therapist for a little while, you know, with under, the right professional boundaries, of course, with that. But this is something that's near and dear to me. One, because I went through it myself, but one, because I love my staff and I see just how dedicated and how amazing they are. And I want them to stay in the field because their clients need them, but they have to take care of themselves and they are what's important. Because we can't do a good job unless we are at our best as well. So burnout and vicarious trauma are often used interchangeably, but the reality is that they're very distinct. So let's start off with a focus on burnout. So there's been over 30 years of research on the phenomenon of burnout across multiple fields of industry. But all of that research really points to three main dimensions that make up burnout. The first one being emotional exhaustion, which should be no surprise. And that really kind of refers to feelings of being depleted, overextended, and fatigued. The second dimension focuses on depersonalization, and this refers to negative and cynical attitudes towards one consumers or work in general. And the last dimension is a reduced sense of personal accomplishment, which involves negative self evaluation of one's work or overall job effectiveness. Many researchers actually consider burnout to be a job related stress condition or even refer to it as being a work related mental health impairment. Across several studies, it seems that anywhere between 21 to 67% of mental health workers may be experiencing high levels of burnout at any given time. In certain studies, they found that about approximately 50% of mental health workers report high levels of emotional exhaustion, and between 30 to 40% report high levels of depersonalization rates. However, most still report high levels of personal accomplishment. Differences in burnout between various mental health occupation types have also shown some evidence that higher burnout exists between community workers compared to those that work in more clinical settings. Burnout is associated with increased depression, anxiety, sleep problems, impaired memory, neck and back pain, and also alcohol consumption. Certain research has investigated the relationship between job related burnout and depressive disorders, which has shown that mild burnout, people who are experiencing mild burnout, were maybe 3 times more likely to develop a major depressive disorder in the future. With those with severe burnout, were 15 times more likely to have a depressive disorder. And this risk actually doubles for men in the mental health field. Employee burnout has also been correlated with a number of negative organizational measures, including reduced commitment to the organization, negative attitudes, absenteeism, and turnover. And also, not surprising, is related to high levels of job dissatisfaction. And it can actually damage the morale of other employees and lead to staff turnover. Burnout and staff turnover are believed to disrupt the continuity of mental health services as well, which then undermines the quality of services provided. High levels of burnout also really kind of show that workers possess insufficient resources to deal with the demands of their job, leading to impaired job performance, which unfortunately our clients see. So when we have staff that are dealing with high levels of burnout, we also have higher reports from clients of low satisfaction with their services that they're receiving. Um, Burnout workers have a tendency to be less empathetic, collaborative, and attentive to their clients. They may be really negative towards them and have negative attitudes towards them as well. And it can also lead to kind of just dissatisfaction within that therapeutic relationship. Um, Emotional exhaustion and depersonalization are also really heavily correlated with negative attitudes, where staff members come off as being distant or hostile or rejecting towards the clients that they're working with. And again, these negative staff attitudes are linked with poor outcomes among our clients with severe mental illness. Vicarious trauma is a process experienced by those who engage with survivors of traumatic events and can lead to profound personal and emotional effects. This type of trauma is often cumulative and can subtly affect the mental health of those professionals over time, leading to changes in their beliefs, psychological needs, and feelings of safety. Professionals experiencing vicarious trauma may find themselves with persistent thoughts related to the trauma stories that they've heard, which can intrude on their day to day life and their personal mental space. Difficulty concentrating on work tasks or even when at home can be a sign that this traumatic kind of response are affecting a professional's cognitive abilities. An amplified emotional response to external stimuli or trauma related content can indicate vicarious trauma, as can sudden tearfulness or feelings of sadness. Contrarily, some individuals may respond to vicarious trauma with emotional numbing or detaching themselves from their feelings in an attempt to cope with distress. When mental health workers are affected by vicarious trauma, their ability to effectively care for clients can be compromised. They may become less empathetic or overly involved, or alternatively, they can become detached and disengaged, which leads to decreased therapeutic efficacy. Issues with maintaining appropriate boundaries can also emerge, leading to harmful enmeshment or excessive distancing from clients, which undermines the therapeutic relationship. Professionals grappling with vicarious trauma may also project their own emotional responses onto clients, risking misinterpretation of symptoms and potential misdiagnosis. So, research indicates that between 40 and 85% of mental health professionals develop some sort of vicarious trauma, with approximately 63% stating that they experience a moderate level of vicarious trauma. So, it's really important for mental health workers to be aware of the risks of this and take steps to prevent it. Some of those risks include a personal history of trauma yourself, kind of having some geographical and social isolation, and even professional isolation. Oftentimes even though we work in a big agency, we can become isolated from our other workers as we're out and about in the community. We're kind of stuck in our offices all day and not really having a chance to get out and socialize with our coworkers. being overworked and overwhelmed, experiencing some symptoms of burnout can also lead to vicarious trauma. Working with too many clients, having limited professional experience can also increase the risk of vicarious trauma because you haven't quite learned those healthy boundaries to be able to set. And having limited training about the impacts of trauma as well, and also being able to work with clients who experience trauma. And having a really high percentage of victimized children can seriously increase the rates of vicarious trauma because of that high level of stress and empathy and emotional involvement when it comes to working with children. Clients who are underserved and disadvantaged, having high rates of those can also increase the risk of vicarious trauma. And working for poor pay under stressful conditions and with limited resources can also increase the risk. So there's a correlation too with this between vicarious trauma and burnout, although they are distinct and separate. When you're experiencing vicarious trauma, and if it's left untreated and you're not working through it within supervision or maybe even through your own therapy, you will have a tendency to have an increased rate of burnout, which can manifest again in being feeling of exhausted and worn out. You have a deeper sense of ineffectiveness of work, which can lead to emotional distress, detachment, ineffective personal behavior, and depression. So, when helpers are worn out, traumatized, they're burned out, they often also tend to work harder. Again, we are caretakers by nature, so we want to continue to strive to do the best for our clients. We want to continue to fix them while often forgetting ourselves. So, as we continue to work harder dealing with these constant stressors and this vicarious trauma and possible combination with burnout, we go further down a dangerous path. And this could lead to additional physical and mental health difficulties, including depression, chronic pain, substance use, and even suicide. So what do we do about it then? Well, that's kind of the point of this podcast, is looking at ways that we are able to take care of ourselves. Although this really points to the need for systemic change and really looking at how organizations and the field of mental health as a whole needs to address the idea of burnout and vicarious trauma, and that we need to really put time within our work experience itself for self-care. Right now, we need to kind of focus on what we can do individually for ourselves. So, throughout the days that we meet for this podcast, we will be looking at different self care activities, different mindfulness activities that can really help professionals approach their day with a fresh, compassionate, empowered viewpoint. Really kind of looking at us being able to continue to stay attuned to our clients and to our coworkers, being able to maintain that empathetic, unconditional, positive regard that's part of person centered care, and also looking at how we stay empathetic towards ourselves and compassionate towards ourselves. And also letting go some of that residue that kind of exists, or that maybe we even call it negative energy or negative vibes, whatever you want to say it is, that we can develop as we sit in sessions with clients and as we work in stressful situations with them and are taking on their stressors or their trauma, and how it just can kind of stick to us, and how we can keep that from becoming vicarious trauma. And also working on how do we manage issues of countertransference. So being able to utilize this time together to really focus on caring for ourselves, finding our balance, the work life balance, not only after we go home, but during the day. Um, Finding ways to enjoy our work, to continue to enjoy it, or to go back to enjoying it if we're starting to lose some of that efficacy that we feel on it, or maybe already starting to feel some of those signs of detachment. So I hope that you all will join me weekly on this podcast as we continue to explore ideas of getting back to our own self-care and getting back to taking care of ourselves professionally and personally. I talk often with staff and the clients that I continue to see that how important self-care is, and that you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot take care of others without taking care of yourself first. So my hope is that you all will find effective and helpful ways to continue to fill your cups. Until next time, thank you for joining me.